I'm going to take a quick look here at the latest news with regards to Haida and the government of Canada and British Columbia making an agreement, which I think is a further demonstration of, to quote the old phrase, white man speak with forked tongue. In this case, it's governments and lawyers, all seeking to maintain, continue as much authority and jurisdiction over First Nations land as possible, when I believe the legal environment is such that they have no jurisdiction, they have no authority, and this is an attempt to try and continue to have as much authority and jurisdiction as possible. I think that all Indigenous people should be taking a different tack than this, but that's just my opinion, so let's have a look at it. All right, so good article from the Tyee with regards to it, and they cover it quite well. Now, they note that it's the Haida Nation's struggle for self-determination. Well, it's only a struggle because the governments have acted in bad faith for literally decades and decades and decades, denying, blocking, using legislation and threats and intimidation and all sorts of other bad habits that they have developed over literally hundreds of years to stop the First Nations from receiving the recognition, I believe, that is due with regards to their rights and titles to lands and the rights to take back jurisdiction over them. So in 2002, the Haida filed a title claim in Supreme Court, British Columbia, that declares authority over the land, inland water, seabed, sea, and airspace of Haida Gwaii, which I believe has been recognized nationally, internationally, provincially, municipally, as acknowledged as a legitimate claim that has proven to be respected in some ways, but then they continue to try and negotiate that down as much as possible. Despite meeting international principles for a native claim, Canadian laws required Indigenous nations in BC to prove their continuous existence, use, and occupation prior to 1846, the year British Crown asserted sovereignty. Asserted. They had no right to it. They just claimed that they were sovereign. And that refers to sole jurisdiction over British Columbia. Notice it's in quotation marks. Crown sovereignty is based on the discredited doctrine of discovery, which has allowed white settlers to magically become masters over much of the world. Now, there's a little bit of editorializing in that, but it's a legitimate statement that this was one of the doctrines that was used to claim ownership of the land, regardless of the existing peoples that were there. Because the Haidas have such strong title claim, the court case has been a negotiation tool in the nation's back pocket for over 20 years. It is yet to go to trial, which could send shockwaves throughout the Indigenous world if title is granted. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's not about granting title. It's about the governments acknowledging legally that they have no claim to title, that it is 100% title of the First Nations. And I even hesitate using that term because that's one of the secondary terms created by the legal system, the Indigenous people. It's the federal government and provincial governments that are trying to have some title granted to them and some jurisdiction granted to them by the Indigenous people. So really, it's like many other things going on in the world, it's 180 degrees of what the people in the system and the government is telling you as to the way things are. So this new agreement, it's a framework for reconciliation. And interestingly enough, it was announced on Friday the 13th and signed on Friday the 13th. And whether or not that means anything, I don't know, but it was a curious date. And it charts an alternative course for prioritizing a negotiation over litigation while saying the two can coexist. And this is one of the problems I have and I see with it, is that it's the federal and provincial governments fighting to coexist with the Indigenous for jurisdiction. It is not the Indigenous fighting for their title and claim anymore. It's now the federal government and provincial government fighting for a right to coexist with them, which they can only do with the permission and consent of the Indigenous. That's my interpretation of the way things are at present. The crucial part is the starting point. Instead of having to prove title, negotiations will now begin from a place of inherent Haida title and rights, which includes the right to self-government. And the reason I've got different colors is there are different levels of intensity of what's wrong with this statement. And when we go to the actual document, we'll see that although this agreement starts from that point, it comes down to the fact that it's not legally binding. All admissions made by the province and the federal government to title and right, recognizing title and right of the Indigenous, is not meant to be true for all cases. It's only for the purposes of this agreement. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's telling people what they want to hear, but not being bound to what you've told them, and that's, I think, a disreputable, not good faith negotiating tactic. So they're trying to shift away from denial politics of the past and moving to a place through acknowledgement of inherent Haida title. A strong foundation for negotiations is established. Now, it appears to be on the face of it. But then again, when you go down further in the document, it's really not a strong foundation. It's not a foundation at all. It's an empty promise. And we'll show you why. So they're trying to maintain jurisdiction over forestry and fisheries and all sorts of stuff. So while title acknowledgement is limited to the terrestrial area of Haida Gwaii, the framework also commits to continued negotiations over marine management. So once again, the principle here is that they're acknowledging that Haida Gwaii have rights over their land, but the Crown is claiming that we're going to have to continue negotiations over the marine because we have the rights to that, and we're the ones giving up rights to the marine. And again, I think it's the reverse. Recognition of title is not as strong as it being granted by the highest court as it was in 2014. Still, the only Indigenous persons to win a title claim in Canada. So the Chilcotin Nation, apologies for not pronouncing that correctly. So why can't they acknowledge title? They claim to acknowledge title in the document, but then they take away that claim and recognition later on in the document. So I'm a little confused. And again, I think it's a negotiating dirty tactic to make people think you're giving them what they want, and then you take it away later on. So this litigator, Jeff Huberman, has been working with the Native Indigenous peoples for over 20 years. A lot depends on how the framework is implemented, noting it's not legally binding. And that's my point from earlier on. We'll see that actually in the document. So they make all sorts of legal statements about recognizing rights and titles, but they're not legally bound to those statements. They can be withdrawn, and they're not legally recognized anywhere. So what's the point? It's a false promise of recognition. So we've been negotiating forever, but this is the biggest step we've taken. While compensation still needs to be finalized, the nation is already looking at buying back some forest lands and a potential site to relocate the village. Well, why do you have to buy back lands that are your own? Well, in some cases, it's because lands are presently in private hands because they've been sold by the province to somebody, and that person paid for the lands. There is a property issue with regards to, well, in order to get them off it, they should be compensated for it. There's a whole bunch of land stuff around that I don't know all about, but that's an open question still to negotiate. His response harkens back to 2004 when the Haida won their Supreme Court of Canada case against the logging company Weyerhaeuser. The judge ruled the Crown has a duty to consult and accommodate Indigenous interests when it comes to harvesting timber or transferring forest licenses. And I think this is also a little bit of a half measure. If you have full title to the land and you have jurisdiction of the land, why is it only a consultation and to accommodate Indigenous interests? That type of qualification, as far as I'm concerned, means that it's the Crown's land, and we recognize you have some claim to it, so you have some say into it, but ultimately it's the Crown's land. And I don't believe that that is a legally valid position in this day and age. Together with the mayor of Masset, the non-Indigenous community just south of Old Masset, Laura signed a protocol agreement with Haida that declared Haida title while Haida ensured that non-Indigenous people could own private property. So there's already some agreements in place recognizing that other people have some private property claims. And that's one thing I've noticed with the Indigenous people is they're not into kicking people out of land and various other things. They want to learn how to work with and walk with the people who have come onto the land over the generations. And everything I've seen is them trying to act in as respectful a way as possible and create a working relationship. So despite the Supreme Court decision requiring Indigenous engagement over logging licenses, Haida Nation had once again not been consulted. So again, this is a matter of there's laws and rules for the corporations and the government. There's court decisions that allegedly force them to act in a certain way, and then they don't. And so the Indigenous people have to go to court and complain about it and fight for it. And why would you negotiate with people who continually break their word? Why would you allow those people to, have any say in anything when they can't be held to the agreements and the contracts and the court decisions that exist? So I think it's a strong position that could and should be taken by Indigenous with regards to not putting up with the BS anymore. They have enough legal power and other things in place that they can take a stronger position, I believe. Laurie said that he trusted, and Laurie is a white guy who has had lots of experience in managing the forests with his job with the company, and he's now supporting that the Haida are more than the provincial government to sustain. He trusted the Haida more than the provincial government to sustainably manage the forests. Well, when has the government done much of anything correctly when it comes to management? So there's evidence as far as he's concerned that we really should be back in the hands of the Haida, not the government, for forest management. The Haida fought hard to regain partial stewardship of these forests. The 2007 Land Use Agreement and 2009 Reconciliation Protocol with the province followed Island's spirit rising and ultimately allowed the Haida to buy back the contested Weyerhaeuser forest tenure, now known as the Tree Farm License 60. Again, that whole idea of buying it back is interesting. Forest management decisions now guided by the 2010 Haida Gwaii Land Use Objectives Order and shared between the Haida Nation and the province. But in cases of disagreement, the province still has final say. Well, the First Nation, or the Haida Nation, as the Indigenous on the land with 100% correct claim to title and jurisdiction, really should have the final say, not the province, and that's my opinion. I hope the new reconciliation framework will help us move toward a place where the province respects Haida stewardship authority. And that's a hope that I'm sure they've had multiple times and have been disappointed multiple times. It'd be nice if it changed, but I don't hold much hope out for it. Despite these measures and tan forest managing the largest timber area on Haida Gwaii, clear-cut logging is still the norm, and cedar has been over-harvested for years. The Council of the Haida Nation has tried to balance economics with the environment, but tan still operates within BC's colonial logging system, which is designed to cut as much wood as possible and cheaply and send it to international markets. This is not forest management, and they claim to be managing the forests, and all they're doing is they're selling it off for corporate profits, and that's why the Indigenous should be taking over the management of it. We have to import wood to build their homes. They live in a forest. Why do they have to import wood to build their homes? It makes no sense. An estimated 70% of Haida Gwaii's original ancient forest is already gone. Delay, 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 delay. This has been going on for over 20 years in the courts. And every year that goes by, more forest is hacked down. So the bottom line is it's all delaying tactics so that they can take as much out of it before they actually have to be held accountable to the fact that the Indigenous have a correct claim to the land and to the jurisdiction. It's not a passion, it's a responsibility, White said. Our people and our lands and our waters are all connected. The province is burning down, the water's drying up, and we're still clear-cutting old growth forests when they do so much for regulating the climate and protecting the water. The colonial forest industrial model needs to end. I would have a tendency to agree with that statement as well. I asked Edenshaw what he thought about his nation's new reconciliation framework with BC and Canada. This is just the beginning, he said. It changes the relationship we have with them, but not our understanding that this is ours. And I believe that his understanding is correct. And I can't imagine that we're accepting, or that this is being accepted as a new beginning when it's been going on for 20 years. And the courts, like I said, provincially, municipally, nationally, internationally, have all recognized the Indigenous claim to rights and titles, and that means jurisdiction. They are the first law in the land. They should not be negotiating from a position of asking. They should be negotiating from a position of telling.